So, this is Ryokyu.
I understand how you feel, Your Majesty.
What are you talking about, Haschwalth? I'm not feeling a shred of emotion from looking at this decaying grave.
Under the floating castle, former palace courtyard, Hisagi landed directly into the middle of the battlefield.
Shuhei, is that you?
The situation around Hisagi was even more confusing than he had anticipated. Kyoraku was covered in injuries, Nanao holding onto his sleeve with most of her spiritual pressure depleted, and a myriad of Quincy's and Arankars who were hesitating to make any moves.
Shuhei, why are you here?
Oh, Lieutenant Hisagi. So you really were here?
Hey, wait, Yumichika. We can't assume he's real.
Head Captain Kyoraku! What the heck is—
Though Hisagi tried to run to Kyoraku, he was forced to stop as Kyoraku pointed Katen Kyokotsu at him.
Head Captain?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Shuhei. Lieutenant Hisagi. I have a lot of questions for you, such as why are you here and what's going on in Katakura Town, but I'm sorry. It's better if neither of us get too close to each other.
I don't understand. Just what is going—
You! Where did you come from?
Huh?
Well, I don't think you were a part of the lineup that arrived with Kyoraku. I haven't sensed the barriers or anything beyond them being broken through either, so how did you break in here?
Are you Tokinada Tsunayashiro?
What an impolite ape you are! That squad insignia. Ah, I see. I've only seen you in the footage, but I do recognize you. So the Soul Reaper that Aura spoke of in Karakura Town was you. Well then. So you went ahead and used the Tenkai Ketchu, you petty little thief? Then how about I answer your earlier question? You're right. I am Tokinada Tsunayashiro. What an honor it is to meet a Soul Reaper with such a promising future, Lieutenant Shuhei Hisagi. Or should I put it this way? I am so pleased that you are penning an article to praise me, Shuhei Hisagi, Editor-in-Chief of the Serete Bulletin. What do you think? Won't a description of how the fool Shunsui Kyoraku met his unsightly end, while mounting an insurrection with Arankars and Quincy's, make for an excellent article? If you'd like, you may even watch from a front row seat. I may even tip you a coin, depending on how the article turns out.
Just hearing him talk made Hisagi realize that Tokinada was a different type of evil compared to Aizen and Yhwach.
I think the readers would enjoy an article about your downfall much more.
But as an agent of the mass media, don't you think it's inappropriate to involve your personal grudges with your work? As a bearer of the news, should you not be consistently impartial?
Even from an impartial perspective. From what I know about you, I doubt you're a good person. What are you planning on doing with Hikone?
You know Hikone?
Come to think of it, Hikone did say something about that. They met a kind Soul Reaper at the pharmacy or something of the sort. I'm asking you what you're planning on making that kid the Soul King.
Does it matter? In order for the Soul Reapers to rule over the three worlds, we must have an absolute symbol to re-establish a new set of values in the world of the living and Huecomundo. Hikone is able to do that. They were created to do that. That is all. It is a simple matter.
You use people like tools.
That is a misconception. Hikone is indeed a tool, but I do not think that people are tools. No, I think of people as beings who think with their own free will and shout and scream and let themselves fall into despair. I consider humans a truly comical show. A tool does not have its own will and instead entrusts itself entirely to my mind. That is a name for something that is not a person, such as Hikone.
Bastard!
It is a simple fact. Hikone is no person. Hikone is no Hollow or a Quincy or a Soul Reaper. They are nothing more than a tool I created. A vessel of power to unobtrusively become king and suppress the three worlds. Naturally. But compared to those incompetent, ignorant fools, I do have a preference for Hikone. That thing is too simple-minded when it comes to emotions. If I told them to die, they would simply do it. And if I told them to crush their own lungs and suffer, they would be happy to pry their chest open using their own fingers. They are somewhat dull to toy with.
So the kid wasn't speaking metaphorically. That's nauseating.
Would you actually order Hikone to do that?
What reason would I have to deceive you on something so trifling?
Well, I give up. I'm running out of options other than killing you right away.
You never had that option in the first place, since you aren't capable of such a feat. But I do not understand. You only just met Hikone once at the pharmacy, did you not? Why are you so fixated on them?
Even if I'd never met the kid before, how could I stand by silently after finding out what you were up to?
What? So it's nothing more than what you'd call chivalry? Or is it compassion? Regardless, it's idiotic. If you're trying to save Hikone, you're misguided. The only way of life that thing knows involves serving me. It is the result of me not teaching them anything else. And also of Hikone never attempting to learn anything else. I never resorted to reward or punishment. That thing simply believes things are meant to be the way they are. Don't you think stealing Hikone's happiness would only serve your own sense of righteousness?
Reap. Kazeshini.
Hisagi readied himself. However, Kyoraku appeared in his blind spot and grabbed his collar.
Huh? Why? What?
As he continued to hold Nanao, Kyoraku jerked Hisagi by his collar and pulled all three of them into the ground. Tokinada looked back at the flames he had created using Ryujin Jaka, then at the shadow the flames had cast under his feet, which Hisagi had been pulled into, and smiled.
Good grief, could you be any more overprotective of your underlings? But are you sure about this, Kyoraku? You truly wish to entrust your last hope to a Soul Reaper such as him?
Inside the shadow.
Kyoka Suigetsu?
Yes. We suffered an embarrassing blow. Other than Captain Zaraki, all of us saw the moment it was released. I think the Arankars and Quincy's must have also understood the ability immediately. Tokinada has been able to use as many Zanpakuto abilities as he desires, while we're immobilized out of fear we'll attack each other. Captain Zaraki himself has had his hands full facing Hikone. And frankly, considering that the child has been battling him for so long, they must be just as much of a threat as Kyoka Suigetsu.
Then what should we do? How do we deal with such a dangerous Zanpakuto?
Tokinada's spiritual pressure is far cry from Aizen's. That's why I think there must be a limit to his complete hypnosis. But even without it, he's still formidable.
Yes, but I can't believe he has the ability to copy every Zanpakuto. As he is the head of the visuals department, it's possible he can only use the abilities he witnessed himself.
Come to think of it, according to Aura, that woman who's in league with him, he was supposedly watching the whole battle in the fake Karakura town.
It seems he's well prepared then. The visuals department was the first to report on Ruki and Ichigo as well. Given the circumstances, I wouldn't be surprised if he were secretly connected to Aizen. Well, regardless, we can't simply assume his powers have restrictions while we're confronting him. Especially since he is obviously the type of man who enjoys pretending he cannot do something, then at the last minute revealing to his opponents that he actually can, in order to make them despair.
That's appalling.
I really did you a terrible disservice asking you to write an article about him. If we survive this, I offer you all my apologies.
I'll kill him.
Lieutenant Hisagi, that's...
I know that I'm not strong enough, but I might be able to steal his Zanpakuto at least.
Tell me, did your Spirit Academy curriculum still cover compulsory battle drills by night?
I know you can hear me, Kyoraku. How about you come out now? Or do you intend to hide in the shadows until everything is over? If that is the case, I don't mind. That way you can watch as the rebel army you hastily threw together meets its demise.
In the flames that spread around him, Tokinada was surrounded by his own countless shadows. He then turned his eyes to Yoruichi.
I have an excellent idea, Shihoin Princess. How about I use the Zanpakuto of the phone family maiden who so yearns for you, and slaughter you with her Suzume Bocchi's power? But of course I won't let you have the second sting immediately. No, After I engrave the seal of death all over your body, I will take my time administering the death-induced strike sting.
Sheesh, you're even more annoying than I thought.
This is my last bit of mercy. Then how about I make myself look like the user of the blade herself? I wonder what that girl's face will look like when she learns it was her own Suzume Bachi's powers that made you disappear without a trace. I cannot help but anticipate it.
It's pretty ironic that someone who acts like a one-off villain from a storybook would end up getting their hands on so much power in real life.
And that's just how the world works, isn't it? Oh, maybe you would like me to take Kisuke Urahara's form to...
Tokinada paused and sensed spiritual pressure rising from the shadow behind him. And when he turned, he saw Kyoraku, Nanao, and Hisagi, holding Kazeshini with his eyes closed.
Oh, no, it hurts to laugh so hard, Kyoraku. Surely you don't intend that to be your last hope.
Tokinada easily understood that they intended to have Hisagi fight with his eyes closed, so he did not see Kyokasuigetsu enter its Shikai form.
Then again, I suppose there must be more to this than that. I see. So you plan on using him as a detector?
Hisagi's weapon was one that could attack from a distance. They likely planned to have Hisagi attack Tokinada with it so Kyoraku and the others could use the position of his voice and spiritual pressure to confirm they were attacking Tokinada and not an ally.
How naive. I'll just overwrite his voice and form, and the trajectory of his attacks using complete hypnosis. Hope does not suit any of you. I will correct this post-haste.
Tokinada's voice rang clearly in Hisagi's ears. The direction of his voice came from where Hisagi's spiritual pressure perception sensed Tokinada, putting his senses in agreement. At the Spirit Academy, Soul Reapers were taught several techniques to battle in the dark of the night, including learning to sharpen their perception and reel in their opponent's spirit ribbons to fight them. Naturally, their attacks wouldn't be as accurate as when they could see, so it was a method mainly used to gain distance from an enemy until they could reach a place with better lighting. But Hisagi was currently fighting a person whose strength rivaled that of a captain, not a run-of-the-mill hollow. The fear within Hisagi was unfathomable, but despite the fear, Hisagi felt strangely calm.
Did Captain Tosen fight under these conditions? No, right now I can still perceive light through my eyelids, but Captain Tosen probably didn't even have that.
Hisagi had heard that Tosen had exhibited excellent hearing and spiritual pressure perception from a young age, and had trained both senses so he could perceive the clouds his friend saw in the night sky. He had been able to sense all kinds of things those with sight could not. Of course, Hisagi was not that experienced, but when he thought of his fear in that darkness, he reminded himself of the fear that Tosen had felt.
I am afraid. I had the same fear for 100 years. The fear of assimilating and dying as a soul reaper. If someone joined an organization solely for revenge, and then abandoned his purpose in order to live peacefully within that organization, wouldn't that be depraved as well? But what is justice? Is it to forgive the man who killed my beloved friend? That would certainly be virtuous, admirable, sickeningly so, in fact. But even if a thing is virtuous, does that make it just? No. I say it's neither just nor virtuous to live in peace and let the dead go unavenged. It is evil!
The reason Hisagi remained conscious and continued to stand firm was because he heard that voice. Tosen had lived on, carrying that rage, unable to abandon his fear. Hisagi wondered why Tosen had to suffer so much, but the answer had risen right in front of him. Tokinada Tsunayashiro. Hisagi turned to where he felt Tokinada's spiritual pressure.
Let me ask you one question. A commoner like you wishes to ask me a question? Oh, is this one of those interviews for the Serite Bulletin? Then by all means, please, go ahead. I don't mind answering, especially for you. You saw it too, didn't you? The fight between me and Captain Tosen in the world of the living? Did Aura or Hikone tell you of that? Yes, that fight was a useful reference. I rewatched it many times. Although I did have to go to great lengths to sneak in the surveillance spirit bugs in a way that the Department of Research and Development wouldn't catch on. Then you should have seen it. Captain Tosen's last moments. You heard it, didn't you? What Captain Tosen yelled. Yes, that really was deplorable what happened to him. I regret most of all that I cannot have been present there myself. What? If only I had been there at the point you pierced his brain and eyes and nebulized him. I could have told him that his dying cries weren't as exquisite and disgraceful as his friends. You!
Rage overtook all other emotions within Hisagi. He threw one half of Kazeshini towards Tokinada, who dodged the attack by a wide margin.
His yells resonated in my mind. They were so very funny and pitiful that I was almost moved to tears. After all the seeds of amusement I cultivated so splendidly, for him to simply rot into oblivion without being able to so much as turn his blade on me, I suppose I should thank you, Shuhei Hisagi. After all, you brought down a traitor who did not even know his place and tried to come after me. If I had to say more, even though I did realize he had an axe to grind, I had no idea he had gone so far as to become cohorts with Aizen. Only when Kisuke Urahara and you folk were exiled was I certain that Tosen was one of the true culprits. Well, it would have been such a chore to tell Central 46 about all that, so I just chose not to.
Hirako and Muguruma glared at Tokinada in disgust.
My hands may be tied right now, but you just gave me another reason to kick your ass. There's something you should thank me for, though. If nothing else, because Tosen was able to keep his rage hidden, he saved Squad 9 many times. Sometimes their lives, sometimes they're mine. And that's why you refuse to teach Hikone anything? Is there some kind of problem with that? That kid still knows nothing. All they can do when they come up against a wall is to run away to the small world you've shown them. Captain Tosen would have never allowed anyone to raise a child in such a twisted way. Don't use another sense of justice as your own. Why don't you rephrase that with your own thoughts? Okay, I will. You're a coward. You teach a kid who hasn't got a clue about anything to serve only you and your motives, and then raise them in this cramped prison for your own convenience. To remain ignorant is to run, to refuse to teach is to be a coward. Is that what you're saying, Soul Reaper? What are you getting at? You're a Soul Reaper too. I see. You are certainly the editor of the Serete Bulletin, aren't you? How arrogant it is to expose someone's personal secrets and believe that spreading them far and wide is justice.
Tokinada moved far from Hisagi and stood atop the castle's half-destroyed roof.
None of you have the faintest idea that we are all living atop the sins of just 5 people. Huh?
Come on. Are you intending to tell us that fairy tale now? We don't even know if it's true.
Though it contains some exaggeration, it is a lesson that we, the Tsunayoshiro family that rules history, have continued to protect. Someone with as sharp an intuition as you can tell from the scars carved into the foundations of the Soul Society whether it is a fairy tale or not, can't you?
You think too much of me. I'm just...
Mid-sentence, Kyoraku vanished. Using what Kazeshini had indicated, Kyoraku traversed the Zanpakuto's chain and closed in on Tokinada using Flash Step.
Oh, how impudent!
Tokinada smiled as Kyoraku was assaulted by a collection of patterns floating in the air.
Is this...
The patterns became feelers that sprang at Kyoraku. He dodged them, but had to abandon his attack on Tokinada. The feelers attempted to follow him, but Nanao had followed suit and erected a Kido barrier to intercept them. Even though they collided with the barrier and were scattered, the patterned whips began to eat away at the reishi itself.
A Zanpakuto? No. Is this a Fullbring?
You realized it was a Fullbring immediately. You really are the head captain of the court guards.
That voice! Is that you, Aura?
Good grief. We have another challenger so late in the game?
I extend my sincerest apologies for obstructing you. However, I would like Lord Shuhei Hisagi to hear the entirety of what Lord Tokinada has to say. Please, if you could somehow pardon me.
And why would that be, miss?
I believe that Lord Hisagi bears the professional duty to know the truth. He can perhaps serve as a good judge to determine whether the world Lord Tokinada seeks to create is right or wrong.
Me?
Though he was curious about what Tokinada might say, Hisagi did not let up on his offense. He controlled Kazeshini again and tried to attack in the direction of the spiritual pressure, but Shinso stretched out faster than he could detect and pierced Hisagi's shoulder.
Hasn't the thought crossed your mind before, Shuhei Hisagi? About whether Kaname Tosen, or rather Sousuke Aizen, might have actually been right? What are you saying? Even if it was for revenge? Can you really comprehend how someone as virtuous as Kaname Tosen would betray the Soul Society itself? Have you ever dedicated a single part of that somewhat deficient brain of yours to consider why Sousuke Aizen detested the being called the Ryo so much?
Tokinada gripped the hilt of Kazeshini as it spun past him and pulled Hisagi along with the chain toward him.
Or maybe I should put it this way. Have you ever considered why Kisuke Urahara would have made the Hogyoku? What his motives for doing so were?
Huh?
What do you mean? He said the Hogyoku was for removing the boundaries between Hollows and Soul Reapers, to surpass the limits of a Kompaku's growth. Yes, but for what reason would anyone need to do that? In those days, he did not even know about Aizen's rebellious inclinations, and no being around could have defeated Genryusai Shigekuni Yamamoto. So what would he accomplish by making anyone that powerful?
It was to stop the Quincy's attack?
In the end, you were able to survive that without the Hogyoku. Although, to be completely accurate, it was likely that he would not have allowed the use of the Hogyoku in that situation.
If Ichigo Kurizaki were given a Hogyoku, the world would become very stable for sure. But that's far from the result you're looking to achieve, isn't it?
Yes, I'm sorry. I lied. If I had given Mr. Kurosaki the Hogyoku, it would have been something entirely different, wouldn't it have?
Though he didn't understand what they were saying back then, now that Hisagi was aware of Hikone's similar nature to Ichigo Kurosaki, and that Aura said they would use the Hogyoku to turn Hikone into the Ryo, a hypothesis formed in Hisagi's mind.
And don't you think it was odd that the Ryo's right arm was dwelling in Ukitoke's body? Why would the Ryo's right arm have been lost? And if it had been dropped to the ground, why would Ryo not have had Squad Zero simply retrieve it?
Mimi Hagi was Ryo's right arm, and Pernida Parnkajas, who had claimed to be a Quincy, was Ryo's left arm. The right arm controlled stillness and the left arm advancement. So what did that mean for the Ryo who had lost both? He neither stayed still nor advanced, but simply existed in that place between stillness and motion.
Wait, what did Aizen say back then? From the beginning, no one has ever stood at the top. Neither you, nor me, nor the gods.
Why had he gone out of his way to specify the not you at Captain Ukitake? Did he know about the part of Ryo that was in him?
But soon, the unattainable vacancy at the top will be filled.
The Ryo was dead from the start.
Kyoraku cast down his eyes, while Yoruichi kept her expression from changing. Tokinada smiled and shook his head.
Close, very close. The thing they forced the name Soul King on was indeed not living. However, it was not dead either. What does that mean?
Even bewildered, Hisagi's attacks did not weaken. He pulled on the blade that Tokinada held using his left arm and threw the other side of Kazeshini with his right. Tokinada sent it flying away using Ketsuburi.
The Ryo was a sacrificial lamb. However, he did possess powers that were equivalent to a god's.
What?
Before the world took on its current form, in a chaotic void where there were no borders between life and death, there was an original protector who stood between hollows and humans for the first time. The Quincy's, Soul Reapers, and Fool Bringers. It could be said he was the ancestor of them all. He was a Quincy, and also a Soul Reaper, and also a normal human bearing countless abilities like a Fool Bringer. He was the symbol of hope who ruled over the chaotic void. The three worlds were created by sacrificing that man. by the 5 people who are the ancestors of our 5 great noble clans. The 5 traitors.
The founder of the Tsunayashiro clan was a powerful man who was yet more paranoid than any other.
Where Osho stood was both a throne room and an altar. The other members of Squad Zero stood around him, silent, as did the newly appointed Imperial Guards who had been tasked to guard the temple. They stood before the crystal that had been sealed behind multiple layers of barriers, the throne that held Yhwach's remains sealed within it. The new guards had been baffled when told that that was the current Soul King, and so after seeing the strife in the Valley of Screams, Osho thought it a fitting time to fill them in. So he fetched the others from their palaces, the only ones who knew the secret that O'Quincy's remains were presently being revered as Reo, and spoke of the Soul Society's past.
In that age, in all of creation, many things were ambiguous. There was no such thing as life or death. And without progress, there was no retreat. While it swayed to and fro, you see, this was a world where one could only wait for all things to chill over the course of 10,000 or even 100 million years. Even becoming a hollow was part of the circulation of Reishi. Eventually, however, the hollows began to eat humans. At that point, the circulation stopped. Had things gone on as they were, all the Konpaku would have been reduced to one massive menos, and the entire world would have come to a halt. But how curious it was. As though the world were rejecting that outcome, suddenly a life was born. A life that could destroy the hollows, turning them to Reishi sand, and once again allowing the world to circulate.
Was that the first Soul King?
Indeed. Others, such as myself, with special abilities, had appeared, but the Reo was exceptional. It may even be said he had a power that was close to being almighty, omniscient, and omnipotent. However, it was not as though the stagnation of the world had been averted by the simple act of destroying the hollows. The Reo continued in that way to protect the world that would have slowly melted into chaos. But there were those who did not believe that was a good world. Although they did not reach the level of the Reo, there were 5 people who possessed powerful abilities. They were the ancestors of the 5 great noble clans, the Shiba family included. Their motives were different. The Tsunayashiro ancestor feared the Reo's power might someday be turned on him. Another ancestor believed a lid was needed to cover the pit that would later become known as Hell. The Kuchiki ancestor believed a new order was needed to guide the world into stability. The Shihoin ancestor believed that an even greater cycle of circulation was needed to progress the stagnant world forward. And the Shiba ancestor believed it was necessary to explore the route of purification rather than destruction for hollows, as hollows also had minds. Curiously, their different motives all led them to the same goal: to separate the current world. There would be a world of Reishi, a world of matter, and a paradise of sand for the hollows to wind up in. Other forms of the world might come into being too, but what was important for them was to have distinct worlds for life and death. But in order to make the separation of the 3 worlds possible, they required the power of the man who had transcended everything. It is said that the Shiba ancestor attempted to persuade him, but the Tsunayashiro used that as an opening to seal the Reo into a crystal. I did not view what happened firsthand, but everything that followed is the history of the Soul Society we know. Using Reo's almighty power as the linchpin, the 5 created the foundation of the new world, the Soul Society, the world of the living, and Waco Mundo. Souls were given a division between life and death, and through that cycle the world moved to a new stage. And at some point, those who were tasked with managing this new world came to be known as Soul Reapers. He may have seen no future where it was avoidable, no matter how much he struggled. Or he may have detected some kind of hope in the new world. it is impossible to fathom his will. But the Reo, it seems, intentionally did not resist. However, the Tsunayashiro ancestor doubted even his non-resistance. He was most frightened of the Reo using his powers to escape the seal and destroy them. So without letting the Reo live or die, they tossed him into a contradictory spiral of simultaneous continuous life and death. They even tore away his arms that ruled his stillness and advancement. But even that apparently wasn't enough. Led by the Tsunayashiro, several of the ancestors spent a great deal of time carving out the Reo's heart, whittling away his legs, scraping out all of his internal organs, and removing them from his body. They did this in order to carve away his power and to render him simply a convenient figurehead for their benefit.
Unable to have a voice over the governance or economy, in a body that couldn't so much as breathe, much less incite rebellion, he continued to act as the linchpin for the Soul Reapers. Though they are the ancestors of the Soul Reapers, the deeds they committed to create a puppet king for themselves truly run deep.
Yes, however, the Reo certainly had his own will. It might be appropriate to call it a flow that essentially guided things over time. It was because he had a will that Ichigo Kurosaki and the others were caught here. We felt it as well. It can be sensed by those whose bones are turned into oaken, who have entrusted a part of their konpaku to the Ryokyu.
The Reo's right and left arm had returned to the Ryokyu in the end. The right arm to protect the world, and the left arm as a natural-born Quincy serving Yhwach to return the world to how it had been before.
Right on. Well, can't comment on his lineage, but the kid raised by the man from the Shiba family coming here under the Reo's will is a pretty entertaining turn of fate, ain't it?
Indeed. The Soul Reaper who was the Shiba ancestor opposed the Tsunayashiro ancestor when they sealed Reo away. We must make known far and wide the sin we have committed and entrust our judgment to the world, the ancestor insisted. Plus, the Shiba ancestor had been searching for a technique to make their own body into a sacrifice in place of the Reo.
Oh, sure seems like something a Shiba ancestor would do.
Those who persist in attempting to make themselves a sacrifice are in their own way the most self-indulgent kind. It seemed the Shiba ancestor was determined to become the linchpin of the three worlds, and convincing the Reo failed, regardless of whether they had the power to or not. But when you consider that it was because the Tsunayashiro ancestor attacked the Reo that the Shiba family bloodline persisted, it is a very ironic story.
The Shiba family, huh? Kyan certainly had that way about him, too.
Well, the Shiba ancestor was obscured from history by the Tsunayashiro family, and as a result, the remaining descendants ended up receiving a cold reception from the five noble clans. However, when a Shiba descendant who bore the right character, Ichigo Kurosaki, showed up and truly did possess the attributes to take Reo's place, I thought that also fate. But seeing how that did not come to be, it seems the world might still need him.
The new soldiers looked at each other, several of their faces pale. But the members of Squad Zero expected as much would happen, as the truth Osho spoke of revealed not only the crime more cruel than murder that their history had been built upon, but the fact they were still continuing to commit it.
If Yhwach is the ancestor of the group called Quincy, then the Reo itself is the source of the Quincy's powers. Whether the Reo left a child behind before he was sealed away, or the power cut away from him simply took human shape and manifested itself, I do not know.
Tokinada released Kazeshimi and then flung the flames of Ryujinjaka at Hisagi in an attempt to burn him. Had Hisagi not felt the heat and retreated, he would have been turned into charcoal.
Don't you think it is a humorous story through and through? The Soul King you so desperately protected is the savior of humanity that my ancestor trapped. And that means that Yhwach was just trying to save what one might call his father.
and the fate he needed saving from was isolation for 1,000,000 years, unable to live or die.
As Tokinada swung with shapeless Zanpakuto, Liltotto saw an opening and released arrows, as the Arankars released Seros, but they all missed. Tokinada had made them believe human-shaped clumps of dirt made through Tsuchinamazu were himself. Hisagi had begun to slow from the increasing injuries throughout the day, and Tokinada barely had to move to evade his attacks.
Yhwach wanted to return the world to its original chaotic state and release his father through death. I do not know which was secondary to the other. However, as a result, Yhwach consumed the Ryo's body and is currently the new linchpin of the world in Ryo's place. Don't you think that is ironic? Hey, Kyoraku!
Well, one does wonder. Though it is slightly difficult for me to ascertain whether what you're saying is a truth or nonsense at the moment. And in practice, it's irrelevant to our situation.
Don't utter such transparent lies. You should know with the position you're in right now, shouldn't you? The information that Sousuke Aizen and Kisuke Urahara knew several hundred years ago. Who would believe that you do not know it?
I don't mind if you don't believe me. The only thing that's certain is that if I don't stop you right now, the world of the living, the Soul Society, and Hueco Mundo will end up in total chaos.
No. The only thing that is certain is that you will all die here. Right. You Soul Reapers have no such thing as justice. Naturally, I don't either. What we have here is the descendants of villains attempting to steal an encampment, and nothing more. If there were justice in this world, then it likely would have resided within Kaname Tosen himself.
Tokinada swung his Zanpakuto again and created a large quantity of ice using Daigoren Hyorin Maru, which he broke into pieces using the gigantic blade of Tenken, scattering a barrage of icicles across everyone's field of vision. He made everyone believe each of the bits of ice were different attacks and lambasted the wasteland. Nanao continued to put up barriers to protect Kyoraku, but by creating so many at once, her spiritual pressure was close to bottoming out.
Don't worry about me, Nanao. Just focus on protecting yourself.
Prioritizing the head captain is a given.
This isn't official business right now. We've come here to fight under a personal grudge of sorts.
In that case, I need to protect you all the more.
But it's starting to look like a free-for-all. Still, I would think there would be some kind of restriction on it.
Kyoraku honed his senses and observed the reichi that flowed between Tokinada and his Zanpakuto. He then noticed something was off about Tokinada's spiritual pressure. It wasn't changing so much as it was degrading and degenerating very slowly.
Don't tell me. Tokinada, are you actually shaving away at your own life force?
Oh, you did well to notice that so quickly. Although, what else would I have expected from you? That is the reason why the previous head of the family did not want to carry this sword. Enra Kyoten consumes its wielder's life. The more it is used, the more it will continue to consume my Konpaku, and that Konpaku will never return. It is a curse similar to the Ise family's Hakyoken.
I really don't understand. Are you really willing to go so far as to wager your own life, simply for your own gratification?
What meaning is there to a life which you do not risk for enjoyment? Even my wife died for her own values, or something like that. There is only one difference, whether it was virtuous or not. That is the only minute difference there is to society.
The head of the Tsunayashiro family was given the duty of ruling history and keeping the treasured sword, but most who learned of the sword's peculiarity relinquished it immediately, out of fear of death. As the head of house could best other Soul Reapers through political influence, they did not need the sword, and they simply left hollows and quincies to the court guards. Since they could not allow it to be stolen, they continued to seal it away, until eventually Tokinada, the treasonous agitator who did not fear his own death, stole the Zanpakuto while its previous owner was still alive. Not for dignity or morality or another's sake, but for his own pleasure. Tokinada didn't mind sacrificing a year of his own life in order to ridicule the weak for a century, and it was that essential part of his nature that allowed Tokinada to master that cursed Zanpakuto with no scruples, and to use it for the supreme Zanpakuto that it was. As those around him were focusing on defense, Hisagi began to regain his composure and narrowly dodged each of Tokinada's attacks.
You're very quiet. Why don't you speak up? Shuhei Hisagi. I am speaking about the truth that you so love. What a dull fellow you are. Is your brain not able to comprehend the truth that I thrust before it? I expected at the very least you would cry out and shout about Kaname Tosen as you love to do.
Normally, Hisagi would have, but the fear that accompanied the darkness of his closed eyes kept his mind calm. The past, the Soul Society. There was darkness. No light, no sound, no smell, not even the faintest quiver of spiritual pressure. The space was dominated by endless darkness and silence. All Hisagi could feel was the ground beneath his feet and the zanpakuto in his grip as his teeth grinded together. He felt like he could hear something behind him. However, he only felt it as the soundlessness continued. But he felt it all the same. A monster. A monster more frightening than any hollow, right behind him. Opening its mouth. A memory of his friend's death came into his mind. Then he saw her corpse replaced with his own. He started to scream, and he swung his zanpakuto around behind him. But the blade was stopped, and then the darkness cleared. All his senses returned as Hisagi remembered that he was in a forest within Rukongai at midday. What had stopped his blade was the blade of his captain.
Captain Tosen.
The light returned, the sound returned, the smells returned. Hisagi was soaked in sweat, and he began to hear his heart thumping fast.
I determined that any longer would be dangerous. First, steady your breathing.
I'm sorry. My actions were shameful.
There's nothing to apologize for or feel embarrassed about. If your senses are abruptly stolen, it's natural to feel fear. As someone who's never had light to begin with, I lose the ability to even move when my hearing is blocked.
How long was I in the darkness?
Not even half an hour has passed.
Convinced that it had been several hours, hearing that left Hisagi mortified by his own inexperience. He watched the black curtain of darkness collapse and converge into Tosen's zanpakuto.
So that was your Bankai, Captain?
Suzumushi Suishiki and Makurogi. That is my Bankai's name.
What Kaname Tosen had first revealed to Hisagi after his promotion to lieutenant was his Bankai. Normally, one would not share the secret of their Bankai so easily with another, but Tosen told Hisagi that he wanted to teach them about the true nature of fear.
You certainly do have fear within yourself. However, I still do not sense fear from your sword and your words.
Hisagi hung his head. He feared only the darkness and blindly swung his sword to dispel that fear. He was a far cry from Tosen, who fought while allowing the fear to lurk within him.
Fear takes many forms. The jet black world you just experienced would provoke fear in anyone. Whether someone knows no light or sound from the start when a person is born, and when they realize there is a world they did not know about, they will feel fear just the same. Someone who does not fear that in the slightest wouldn't be human, or Soul Reaper, or Hollow. They would be a monster from a place unfamiliar to us.
A monster?
One who does not know fear will eventually become a monster. The more you and I abandon our fears, the more we move away from being warriors, and the more we approach becoming heartless metastases. That is something you should not forget.
I don't see you ever becoming a monster, Captain Tosen.
I do not know the light, nor do I see the colors that delineate the world. If a time comes when I learn about those things, and I see only hope and pleasure in the remade world, and I forget my fear, at that time, perhaps, I will stop being a warrior.
Captain?
We must continue to carry our fear in the path we walk, our pride as Soul Reapers, and we must protect the world itself. Because when we have a path we have yet to know, pride we have yet to learn, and a world we have yet to experience in front of us, we cannot expect that the ground we stand upon will be peaceful forever.
Present day, Valley of Screams.
Why did Captain Tosen despise the Soul Reapers to such an extent? It wasn't just Tokinada individually, but the existence of Soul Reapers themselves that he hated. I wasn't afraid of anything. I didn't understand anything. What are you going on about? I was always convinced that I was right. That was why I went into the fight with the resolve to open Captain Tosen's eyes.
Like I said before, you haven't changed at all. Even as you stand there to confront me, your words don't have a shred of fear in them.
I might be the one who's actually wrong.
It might be my sense of justice and the world that I'm standing in that's wrong. I never even thought of that possibility. I thought Captain Tosen had just been tempted by Aizen.
Wielding a sword without fear of it is to be unworthy of a blade.
A sword that wasn't a Zanpakuto. Captain Tosen brandished his justice like a sword. What Tokinada said was likely true. There's no reason for him to lie now, and it was consistent with what Aizen said. And it's more than enough of an answer for why Captain Tosen hated the Soul Society itself. The existence of the Soul Society and the history of the Soul Reapers are a betrayal of his friend's wishes. The Soul Society's justice covered the world in clouds that couldn't be cleared, but gave the false hope that they could, and that might have been Captain Tosen's true enemy. I wasn't afraid of the Soul Reapers and the Court Guard's justice in the slightest, and the only reason I wasn't was because I believed in their justice, while Captain Tosen went on this whole time carrying his fear.
If I really feared fighting, why didn't I try to hear Captain Tosen out? I just kept spewing nonsense about how I was gonna open his eyes. Ah, I see. So you're regretful then. Because without knowing what Kaname Tosen's true feelings were, you shamelessly insisted that you were an ally of justice. Then what will you do about it? Do you wish to rewind time? Would you return to the middle of that fight, shedding tears as you joined Tosen's side under Aizen? But I don't intend to claim that Captain Tosen was right, even if everything you said was true. Regardless of that, I would still probably stand in Tosen's way. Then how about we try to reproduce things? What do you think you really accomplished back then? The justice that Tosen adhered to was itself pure. Don't you think that when faced with that, your justice and your textbook truths are flimsy? Suzumushi Nishiki, Benehiko.
Tokinada shot toward Hisagi countless blades that separated into long needles, the power of Tosen's and his own former wife Kakyo's Zanpakuto. However, the chain that connected Kazeshini swept them all aside with precision.
What?
It was almost as though Hisagi had seen every blade. Seeing that made Tokinada's grin disappear.
Don't talk about justice. A bastard like you who hasn't got any fear of death has no right to talk about Captain Tosen.